I've been managing properties for over a decade for homes which are in the suburbs and rural areas all over Alaska, and I've seen it all. Late rent, broken windows, tenants who disappear in the middle of the night. So when Emily moved in with her husband, it was a relief to finally have someone responsible. She was polite, quiet, and paid rent early every month. She kept to herself, but that was fine with me. Not everyone wants to be best friends with their landlord. She worked at some tech company in the town nearby and mentioned she had odd hours. She told me she liked how private the unit was, on the edge of town surrounded by woods. The perfect tenant, really. I did not speak with her husband. She mainly paid the rent, handled any problems which came up, and spoke to me the most. It was like her husband didn't exist. A few weeks ago, Emily sent me a text about a leaky faucet. It was late, almost 10 p.m., but I figured I'd take a look the next morning as I did with all my tenants who had issues this late. She insisted it was urgent and practically begged me. She said the dripping was driving her crazy, so I grabbed my toolkit and drove over. Her car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual as she said she worked late sometimes. I let myself in with my spare key and called out to let her know I was there. No answer. The place was spotless. I mean spotless. No dishes in the sink, no shoes by the door, not even a stray piece of mail on the counter. It felt like a model home, not somewhere someone actually lived. It very quickly put me off ease. I just wanted to get the job done and leave. I found the culprit, a leaky faucet, as she said, in the kitchen. It wasn't anything major, just a loose valve. As I tightened it, I noticed something odd. A faint smell, metallic and sour, coming from the garbage disposal. It was just so unusual, a horrific smell that I had never smelt before. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and peered down the drain. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at, just a wet, dark mass. But then I realized it was hair. Long, matted hair clogging the disposal. I pulled back, gagging. It was none of my business, I told myself. Maybe she'd try to wash out a wig or something. People do weird things, right? Still, the smell stuck with me. And that night, all I could think about was the hair. I had a nightmare greet me with open arms as I rested, and it was something I don't think I'll forget for a long time as I saw something slowly climb out of the drain. It was so disturbing to watch its mangled figure like a broken puppet with bones and muscles tied on visible under the pale skin which laid over like a bedsheet. Just before it began moving towards me, I awoke to an alarm, 7 a.m. The next day, Emily texted me to thank me for fixing the faucet. I wanted to ask about the hair, but I didn't. It just wasn't my place, and that nightmare was just my consequence of curiosity. Unfortunately, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, as I was filing paperwork, I pulled up her rental application. Everything checked out. Steady job, good credit, no criminal record. But something nagged at me. A gut feeling I couldn't shake. I decided to look her up online. Her social media was sparse, just a couple of work-related posts and an old vacation photo. Nothing unusual. And then I searched her name in various news sites. And there it was. An article from 6 years ago. Emily Rivers, local woman involved in brutal home invasion. The details were horrifying. She'd been attacked in an apartment by a man late at night. She managed to fight him off, but he escaped before the police arrived. The invader was caught and sent to prison on breaking and entering, but released last month. I felt a chill run down my spine. No wonder she was so private, I thought. No wonder she chose a place out in the woods. She was probably still terrified he'd come back for her. A few days later, Emily called me. Not texted, called. She sounded panicked, Said she thought someone had been in her house while she was at work. She couldn't explain it, just that things felt off. I told her I'd come over right away. When I arrived, she was pacing in the driveway, her face pale. She told me she thought someone had moved her things, just little stuff, like the way her couch pillows were arranged or how her toothbrush was angled in the holder. Nothing big, nothing missing. But she knew. I checked all the locks, all secure. The windows were shut tight. There was no sign of forced entry. I told her it was probably her imagination, but she didn't look convinced. Before I left, she asked if I'd install a second deadbolt on the front door. I said I would. That was 2 nights ago. This morning, I was about to install a secondary lock. Instead, I got a call from the police. They said there'd been an incident at the property. When I arrived, the place was crawling with officers. One of them pulled me aside. "Are you the landlord?" he asked. I nodded, my stomach in knots. "We found a body," he said, "in the crawl space under the house." My mind reeled. "A body? Who?" He hesitated. "A man. We're still identifying him, but it looks like he's been there a while." "A while? How long?" I thought back to Emily's spotless house, her unease, the second deadbolt. That's when I saw her, sitting in the back of a police car. She looked calm. Too calm. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to some far-off melody. I walked closer and she turned to look at me. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes, those dark, unblinking eyes, pierced right through me. And then I remembered the article. Not the headline. The photo. Emily sitting on the front steps of her old apartment, her face pale and tear-streaked, and behind her, officers wheeling out a stretcher with a man on it. I'd assumed he was the intruder, the attacker. But the article didn't say that. I must have been too tired to realize, but looking back, the headline just didn't sound right. The article began with, "A 19-year-old man was found in a crawl space inside of his own home after a supposed home invasion. Emily Rivers, a local dentist, was arrested on suspicion of murder and arrested for breaking and entering." I stared at Emily in the police car. She didn't look away. Her lips parted just slightly, like she was about to speak. But she didn't have to. Because I finally understood. She wasn't the victim of a home invasion. I'm a good person. I've always tried to be a good person. And I don't mean just tipping a little extra or buying free-range meat. In every decision I make, in every part of my day, I try to think about how I can help the people around me. I've had 7 rescue dogs and 3 cats. I give away money to charity on a regular basis, and I do volunteer work in local parks over the weekends. By every metric, I am a good person. So, why is it then that when I need something in return, everyone looks the other way? Why is asking for a tiny bit of payment every now and then like pulling teeth? Just last week, I looked after the old lady at the end of the road, Mrs. Hutchinson, while her granddaughter was out of town on a business conference for the weekend. You see, her mind had started to go, and it's not safe to leave her by herself. I treated her so well. I cooked for her, took her outside in her chair for a stroll in the park, and I read to her to ease her to sleep. I didn't even charge her or her granddaughter. Well, I didn't charge them money, at least. And 3 days ago, when that little boy came up to me with tears in his eyes, sniffling and sobbing because he didn't know where his mama was, I took his hand and marched right up to the counter for them to call her up. I stayed with the boy, who told me his name was Tommy, for 45 minutes until his mother came. A horrible, ungrateful woman who yanked little Tommy by the arm and nearly sprinted out of the store. Not so much as even a thank you. That very same day, not an hour after, I walked by a homeless man sitting on a street corner. I made conversation with the man, gave him my jacket, which, by the way, had $40 in its pocket, and took him to get lunch. Not some cheap fast food place, but a real sit-down restaurant. These are just 3 examples of an entire lifetime of good deeds. So you see, I am a good person. I know I am. And it's not like Mrs. Hutchinson was using her legs anyways. I'm gonna get far more use out of them than she'd be able to. Not to mention the service I provided. The ungrateful granddaughter didn't even need to ask me to care for poor Mrs. Hutchinson. I did it out of the goodness of my heart. And it is my heart. I worked hard to earn it. And that little boy, he has 2 hands after all. If you ask me, that's a small price to pay to ensure his safety in such a dangerous world. The mother should have been bowing in gratitude for the time I sacrificed for her and her son. And almost worst of all was the homeless man. After all I gave him, he had the audacity to call me a freak? A monster? I'm a saint! But even saints lose their temper. Still, even in my anger, I was fair. I only took half of the jaw. That leaves him $40 richer with a stomach full of good food, which wasn't cheap, by the way, and with still the other half to use when he eats. I've just finished putting myself together, and I must say, these new parts fit like a glove. I use the old rotten ones as fertilizer for my garden. I grow my own vegetables, even give them away to neighbors sometimes. But I sigh when I think of how unfair it all is. I do so much and ask for so little in return. Maybe someday someone will finally be able to see how generous I am, how much I give to those around me. Until that day, I'll go on helping people, handing out small blessings to everyone I can. Because that's what good people like me do. As I stepped into the small elevator, the man immediately started staring at me. It was just the 2 of us in there, and the panel was on his side. Luckily, the button for the first floor was already pressed. No need for conversation. But it was a tall, old building, and as the elevator slowly passed through its 32 floors, I noticed the man kept sizing me up. I focused straight ahead, fixing my gaze on the door. "Are you Anna Hansen?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, giving him a nervous smile. "I knew it," he exclaimed, his enthusiasm unsettling. "I've been following your career since the 2021 state championship. You made history there." "Thank you," I responded shyly. Maybe it's just a gymnastics fan, I thought. But his appearance left me uneasy. He looked to be in his 40s, about 6 feet tall, with a round belly and what I could only describe as wild, thinning hair. I'm 5'1", and he loomed over me. I went to this building every Thursday for massage therapy, but I've never noticed this guy before. I just want to say, he continued, the blue leotard you wore during your gold-winning vault was one of the prettiest I've seen in the sport. Okay, my instincts weren't wrong. What a creep. I thanked him again, forcing an awkward smile, and turned my attention back to the elevator's display. 5th floor. Almost there. But then a loud noise, followed by a sudden jolt, made me lose my balance. The lights flickered off for a moment before coming back on in a dim red glow. Emergency lights. Ah, no, he muttered. This ancient elevator keeps doing these pranks. He pressed the alarm button and spoke to maintenance. They explained the technician was finishing up another call nearby and wouldn't take long. We'll just wait then, he said, flashing an unsettling smile that sent a chill down my spine. Determined not to engage further, I checked my phone. No signal. We sat in silence for a few minutes until, of course, he decided to speak again. Your life story is also quite special, he said. Daughter of a poor Texas rancher, left the cows behind for the big city and got discovered at 12. Really inspirational. Thank you, I replied for the 3rd time, now a bit uneasy with how much he knew about my background. You're my 2nd favorite gymnast, he added. After Carly Miller. That name made my skin crawl. Carly Miller was my biggest rival. In a month, we were set to face off in the national finals. The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a small blade. But it's not a fair comparison, he said, a twisted grin forming on his face as he stepped closer. For Carly, I'd do anything. Anything. What happened next was hard to explain to the police. The stab I got in my shoulder, the struggle, the gun I carried on my right hip, and the 3 shots I gave him near the chest. The only thing I clearly remembered from that afternoon was the relief of seeing the elevator doors open again, even if soaked in blood. The injuries were quite bad, and I didn't get to compete in the finals. But neither did Carly Miller. She was arrested 5 days after these events. According to the police reports, Carly encouraged a crazed fan to get rid of me. There were even texts between them where she provided details of where and when I would be each day of the week. Thankfully, her research wasn't detailed enough. The daughter of a Texas rancher always carries a gun. As for me, after months of recovery, I returned to competing and slowly worked my way back into the game. Now, I just take the stairs. I was part of a climbing troupe that wanted to scale this cliff that was supposed to be difficult for even the seasoned rock climber. We had our gear and the mood was upbeat. Half the trip was in a hired bus and the other trekking through an amazing location. Everything about the trip was going well, and the group gelled really well together. We wanted to climb. It was that simple. The weather was calm, and it was said to be the best time of the year to climb, and any other time would be either blown off by super strong winds or snowed in. The rock wall we were making our way to was located near one of the longest waterfalls. It wasn't on record because it wasn't like that the whole year. In winter, the water froze and it would just trickle down the rocks. We made it to the site and set up camp and started checking our gear. I am a seasoned rock climber, so my gear is pre-checked before heading out, but still check again. You should always still check again at the location just in case. Everything checked out, save for a few missing pins and ropes. We were prepared for such shortfalls. The leader, Andrea, said we will spend a day on the ground to make sure everything was accounted for and that the climb should be dry. The waterfall was an amazing sight to behold, and the water was crystal clear. I took a ton of photos for my socials and also of the surrounding areas. I really liked the place and thought about returning there if the climb went well. The rock face was smooth and difficult to map from where we stood, and Andrea and his partner also commented that it was unusual to see such a seamless face. The night before the climb is when all hell broke loose. There were 12 people in the troop, and I was the only one to make it out. Something was watching us, and I wasn't the only one to notice this. Others like Catherine also mentioned this. We tried to brush it off as anticipation, jitters, other such feelings. I pretty much brushed it off completely. That night, I was in my tent when I heard something walking just outside. I felt like it was a very large person walking around looking at the camp. I did not call out, but remained silent in hopes that this is one of the other climbers running some kind of joke to scare everyone. The walking sound faded as the person walked away. I was bracing myself for a jump scare or something, but nothing came. I peeked out of my tent and saw that the place was completely quiet and everyone was either asleep or in the process of doing so. I was beginning to feel like there was something out there and I needed to check. I got out of my tent and walked the perimeter of the site with my torch and couldn't find anything. Feeling guilty of being scared so easily, I got back into my tent and turned in for the night. It was maybe an hour or so later. I heard the first scream and the sound of tearing fabric. I woke up and tried to figure out what was happening. The sounds of screams and shouts were coming from the other tents, and I tried to get out to see what was happening. I heard voices of people laughing and other sounds of things being hammered. Looking at my tent, I couldn't make out what was going on other than the sound, so I lit my torch and aimed it at where the sounds were coming from. What I saw scarred me deeply. I saw 2 large men holding up one of the women who was with us. One was holding the hands and the other the legs, and they were pulling her with a sickening cracking and tearing sound. Pulled into 2. My hand shot up to my mouth and I held back the shout and I dropped the torch. I got out of my tent and ran to a tree. I wanted to climb up and hide from this carnage. There was another man who was beating a tent mercilessly with a trunk. They were too preoccupied to notice me, but I knew I would suffer the same fate. I was trying to survive, and I hated myself for not trying to protect my friends. Other tents were empty, and I guessed that the others might have run, so there was that sense of relief. While climbing the tree, I heard more screams, but they were coming from the forest. It dawned on me that there could be more of these people. What was happening? The tour guide told us this was supposed to be a protected sanctuary. These forest people were not mentioned to us. I looked down from where I was at the tree, and I could see that one of the men was now looking at my tent. He, or it, was looking for me. The fear of being found kept me rooted to the tree as I remained completely quiet and still. The thing was walking around the other tents looking for more of the troop. My torchlight was giving me full display of the other thing that had squatted down to rip the remains of the woman and was eating the meat. I saw that it had the shape of a human, but the head was larger and the body much more muscular. The hair on the body was thicker. It would have resembled an ape, but this was more human-shaped. The head was larger, but in the sense that the crown was longer. I saw the face, and it resembled human features, but the eyes were sunken. I could now smell the air. It smelt of rot. It sort of reminded me of the swamps I had once visited. The smell of dead vegetation mixed with rotting meat and human waste. I watched the one looking closer to the tree I was on, look around more and sniff the air every now and again. It got closer to me, but then heard something from the forest and ran in. I looked at the one who was beating a tent, rip it open, and began fishing out pieces and examined them. It found a piece it wanted and began biting down. My breathing was becoming shallow as my grip to the trunk I was on was tight, and I had to loosen it slightly to breathe better. I was beginning to feel nauseous, and the smell was really making my stomach churn. I tried to keep from making any sound as the carnage from below continued. I started asking myself how I was overlooked and kept coming short on why I was grateful to survive this long. I heard something approach my tree from the back, and it was another one of those things holding something in its hand. To my horror, it was holding the upper half of another member. He was ripped in half, just like the woman. It stopped under the tree and began to sniff the air, and I feared I was next. Thankfully, it lowered its head and continued to the campsite and tossed the remains to the one eating the woman. It sat down and started eating also, ripping pieces of meat from the remains and biting down. The adrenaline finally wore off, and I was losing consciousness. Fatigue was finally taking over, and I was looking for the fight to stay awake. I tried not to move until the things left, but I knew sooner or later I was going to fall asleep and maybe fall from the hiding spot. A loud howl woke me, and the things were immediately alert and looking around. They picked up whatever they could and ran from the camp. I thought it would be wolves from the sound of it, but it could have been their signal to leave or something. Waiting for longer only delayed the inevitable sleep, and I was soon asleep. I woke later, and it was daylight. I found myself sitting on the trunk. I looked down at the camp and saw the carnage from last night. I waited for some time before climbing down and saw the true extent of last night's massacre. This was ungodly in every form of butchery. The bodies of the torn man and woman were gone, only leaving behind their inside and other viscera. I checked the beaten tent and saw the utter mangled body of the inhabitant. They were beyond recognition. I turned and ran. I did not care for anything and ran to the sanctuary offices or other camps. I couldn't think of anything but to survive now. I had been talking to Sam on a dating app for a couple of weeks, and everything seemed perfect. He was kind, attentive, and just the right amount of mysterious. His messages always carried a charm that made me feel seen and appreciated. Something people nowadays call a green flag. When he finally asked me out, I couldn't have been more excited. Our first date was at a quaint little cafe on the edge of town. Sam was even more engaging in person. His deep voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It all made me feel at ease. We laughed about the quirks of online dating, shared stories about work, and talked about our favorite childhood memories. Everything about him seemed so genuine. By our third date, I felt like I could trust him. So when he invited me over to his place one evening, I didn't hesitate. "I'll cook for you," he said. "You won't regret it." His house was in a quiet neighborhood, tucked away on a street lined with tall oaks. It was a cozy, neatly kept home, inviting and warm. Inside, soft lighting and the scent of garlic and herbs filled the air. We shared drinks and laughed over silly stories as he finished preparing dinner. But as I looked around the living room, something caught my eye. In the corner of the room was a large cage housing a bright white cockatoo. Its head was adorned with a cute yellowish crest, and it tilted its head curiously when it noticed me staring. "Oh, that's Charlie," Sam said, following my gaze. "He's a bit of a talker." I smiled and stepped closer to the cage. The bird was striking, with intelligent eyes that seemed to study me as much as I was studying it. "Hello, Charlie," I said softly. The cockatoo ruffled its feathers and tilted its head to the other side, as if it were sizing me up. Sam chuckled. "Don't worry, he's cool with strangers." I laughed, brushing it off. But the way the bird's gaze lingered on me felt odd. I turned my attention back to Sam as he brought over 2 plates of steaming pasta. Dinner was delicious, and we quickly fell into our usual rhythm of playful banter and easy conversation. But every so often, I'd catch Charlie staring at me. I tried to ignore it, but there was something unnerving about those unblinking eyes. After dinner, we moved to the couch with glasses of wine. Sam leaned in closer, and for a moment, I thought he was about to kiss me. But before anything could happen, the cockatoo let out a piercing screech. "Help! Help! Help!" The voice was startling, a mix of terror and desperation. My body tensed as I turned to look at the bird. It was perched on its swing now, its beady eyes locked onto mine. Sam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm so sorry about that. He gets like this sometimes. Probably watched too much TV." I forced a nervous laugh, but the bird's cries had shaken me. "It's okay," I murmured, though my voice wavered. The atmosphere calmed for a few minutes. However, it wasn't for too long. Approximately 10 minutes into the chit-chat, Charlie let out another screech, repeating the word "help" over and over. This time non-stop. I tried to focus on Sam as he continued to apologize, but I couldn't shake the unease that was creeping over me. The bird's cries echoed in my ears, each one more unsettling than the last. "Maybe I should head home," I said finally, forcing a stiff smile. "It's getting late." Sam looked disappointed but didn't press me to stay. "Of course," he said. "Let me walk you to your car." As I gathered my things, I glanced at Charlie one last time. The cockatoo was silent now, but its eyes followed me as I moved. My stomach churned with an inexplicable sense of dread. When Sam lingered at my car, his eyes seemed to study me too closely. I muttered a quick goodnight and drove off, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't fully explain. The next day, I texted Sam to thank him for dinner, but he didn't reply. At first, I thought he was just busy, but days turned into weeks, and my messages went unanswered. I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe he'd lost interest, or maybe the bird's outburst had embarrassed him. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. A month later, I was scrolling through the news on my phone when a headline stopped me cold. Local man arrested for kidnapping attempt. Victim escapes with bruises. I clicked on the article, my pulse pounding. Sam's face stared back at me. His familiar smile now twisted into something sinister. My breath caught as I read the details. A woman had been lured to his home under the pretense of a date. She had narrowly escaped, running barefoot to a nearby convenience store for help. The article went on to describe how police had searched his property and made a horrifying discovery: the remains of another woman buried in his backyard. My stomach turned as I read the timeline. She had been missing for 6 weeks. Then the article showed a photo of the deceased victim. My heart stopped. The woman in the picture looked exactly like me. A cold sweat broke out across my skin as I replayed that night in my mind. The cozy house, the warm lighting, the bird. My thoughts stumbled over themselves as the truth began to take shape. The cockatoo. I quickly realized that cockatoos can't form words on their own. They can only mimic sounds they've heard before. The bird hadn't been frightened by me. It hadn't been watching too much TV. It had been repeating the desperate cries of the woman who had come before me. The woman who looked like me. My hands shook as I pieced it all together. The way Charlie had stared at me, the way Sam's demeanor had shifted when I wanted to leave. I had been in that house completely unaware of the danger I was in. I could have been the next headline. From that day on, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Sam's arrest brought me some closure, but the memory of that night would never leave me. And every time I hear cockatoos mimic human speech, I feel the chill all over again. I'd heard of the stories. Everyone had. About the whispering stalker. A creature that roamed the forests, stalking its prey with a slow, relentless pace. They say you hear it first. A whisper just behind you, low and coaxing, calling your name. And then you start to feel it. A presence lurking just out of sight, getting closer, always closer. The last thing you hear before it takes you is the sound of its dry, raspy breath in your ear. I'd never believed the stories, not until I found out who it really was. The truth was that it was a man in his late 20s finding young women to murder and use to his heart's content. I found that out from my uncle, a police officer who warned me of who my father really was and why he worked so late. The story was buried by the town, but it couldn't disappear from me. I was hanging out at Chris's place one afternoon when I mentioned it, the usual cryptid banter. "You ever heard of the whispering stalker?" I asked casually, sipping my soda. Chris snorted. "It's just another one of those creepy stories people tell around campfires, like that Wendigo stuff." Mia, who'd been listening quietly, frowned. "No way. My aunt told me about it when we were kids. She said it was real. People went missing out in those woods." I laughed, but I wasn't really joking. I could see it in their eyes. They were already buying it. And that's when I planted the seed. "You know," I said, leaning in like I was sharing some big secret, "there's a place not far from here. It's where the stalker's been spotted the most. They say you can hear it if you're quiet enough. If you listen long enough, you'll hear it whispering your name, calling you in." Mia shifted uncomfortably. "That's messed up, man." Chris was more skeptical. "You really think we should go looking for this thing? It sounds like a joke." I let that doubt settle in the air. "I don't know. I think it might be worth checking out. We could hike into those woods tonight, see if we hear anything. If nothing happens, we turn back. If we hear something, well, maybe we'll be the ones to prove it's real." Mia hesitated. "I'm not so sure about this." "Come on," I said, keeping my voice light. "It'll be fun. We're not really gonna find the whispering stalker. It's just a story, right?" Mia finally gave in, probably because she didn't want to seem like the scared one. Chris reluctantly agreed too, but I could tell he wasn't fully on board. That night, we met up in the woods. It was cold, the moon hidden behind clouds, casting the forest in a thick, dark blanket. We had our flashlights, but the beams barely cut through the trees. I could feel the tension between us, and I knew it was the perfect time to make it real. I led the way, pretending to look for signs of the stalker, scratches on trees, disturbed ground. I let the silence grow, let the tension build. And then I made my move. I started to whisper, just faintly at first. A low, barely audible sound. Something that might be mistaken for the wind or the rustling of leaves. But it wasn't. It was me, using a recording I made a few days prior. At first, Chris and Mia barely noticed. Then I made it louder, clearer, like a whisper right behind them. "Chris, Mia." They stopped dead in their tracks. I watched as their faces shifted from confused to terrified. I let it hang in the air for a moment before I spoke again, this time a little louder. "Come closer." Mia's eyes went wide. She looked around, her breathing quickening. "Did you hear that?" Chris laughed nervously, but it was shaky. Okay, that's enough. This isn't funny anymore." I didn't stop. I couldn't. "Come closer." Mia's voice was trembling now. "Please, can we just go back?" But it was too late. I'd already set it in motion. In a panic, I grabbed the rope from my bag. I was quick, but calm. I had them where I wanted them. Chris tripped backward into the underbrush, and Mia froze, trying to understand what was happening. I didn't give them the chance to fight back. The forest was still. The wind had stopped. It was so quiet that all I could hear was their panicked breathing and my own. I watched as the fear set in, as they realized what was happening. The stalker wasn't coming for them. I was. It was quick. Too quick. A few stabs, just enough to keep them quiet, and it was over. Their bodies were heavy on the ground, their faces twisted in fear, and still trying to scream, but unable to. I didn't feel anything. Not guilt, not fear, just satisfaction. I had continued what my father had to stop. I dragged their bodies deeper into the woods, making it look like the stalker had taken them. There were signs, broken twigs, torn fabric. No one would suspect me. No one ever did. The next morning, I went home. I washed the blood off my hands. I acted like nothing happened. But then tonight, I was lying in bed, replaying the events in my mind, my heart racing from the thrill of it. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it. That faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, the trees. But then I heard it again. Alex. Alex. I froze. My blood went cold. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. The whisper came again, closer this time. Come closer. I slowly turned my head, and there, standing just outside my window, was a figure. It wasn't tall, not like I expected. It was hunched, its face hidden under a dark hood. Its body was long and thin, like a twisted version of a man. And from beneath the hood, I saw its eyes glowing faintly, yellow and unblinking. The whispering stalker wasn't a story. It was real. And it was waiting for me. To punish me for doing its job. I had moved into the apartment complex just weeks ago, excited for my new job in the city. The independence was exhilarating, new friends, new places, but the loneliness that crept in at night was undeniable. One evening, I sat by my window, absent-mindedly watching the street below, when something caught my eye. In the apartment directly across from mine, a tall silhouette stood by the window. The room behind it was dim, swallowing the details, but I could tell it was a man. He didn't move. Feeling an odd compulsion, I raised a hesitant hand in an awkward wave. No response. He just stood there, staring. A chill ran down my spine. Uncomfortable, I shut my window and turned away. For the next few nights, the figure remained. Every time I glanced over, he was there. Still. Watching. This wasn't a trick of the light or a passing shadow. Someone was standing there, night after night, facing my window. Dread settled in my chest. I decided to ask my real estate agent, who had arranged most of the rentals in the complex. He brushed off my concerns with an easy laugh. That flat? It belongs to the Stevens, a father and his teenage daughter. The guy's friendly. Maybe he just smokes by the window. That didn't explain the stillness, the unwavering stare. the unease gnawed at me until I couldn't take it anymore. That evening, I knocked on the door of the apartment. A man in his mid-40s answered. Behind him, loud music blared from one of the rooms. I introduced myself and hesitantly mentioned the figure in the window. He blinked and then chuckled. Oh, that? Wait here. A moment later, he returned, dragging a life-size cardboard cutout of a famous TV star. My daughter's obsessed with him. Got it for her birthday, he said with a shrug. I'll put up the curtains if it's bothering you. I forced a chuckle, muttered something about it being fine, and then left. But the interaction left me unsettled still. He had been polite, sure, but something felt off. He never invited me in. Days passed. I avoided my window entirely, pulling my curtains shut to block out the eerie silhouette. But one night, as I scrolled through my phone, a breaking news alert made my breath catch. A serial killer long on the run had been spotted at a nearby subway station. His last known victim, a 15-year-old girl, had vanished months ago. She had been his student, just like the two others before her. Their bodies had been found in the woods, but until now, no one had linked the cases. A former neighbor of the girl had recognized the man at the subway and tipped off the police. I clicked on the article. The screen loaded. A picture appeared. My blood ran cold. It was Mr. Stevens. My fingers shook as I dialed the police. The next few hours blurred. They told me to stay put. At midnight, a detective knocked on my door. My real estate agent stood beside him, pale as a ghost. I explained everything, how I had first noticed the cutout, how I had met Stevens. The detective listened, his face unreadable. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he exhaled sharply and then gave a small nod. We found this in the apartment, the detective finally said. Figured you should see it. From the shadows of my dimly lit corridor, an officer stepped forward, holding the same cutout Stevens had shown me. But now, something was different. Bold red letters had been scrawled across the figure's chest. Help me. My stomach dropped. She knew I had seen the cutout. So she had written on it her last desperate attempt to escape and placed it by the window, hoping someone would notice. I had noticed. And I had shut my curtains. Beneath it, in a steadier, mocking scrawl, there was another message. If only you had looked closer. I haven't opened my curtains since that night. The police cleared the apartment after a few days. No one ever came to claim what was left behind. No family, no friends. Just silence. No one has rented it since. And yet, sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city is quiet and my room is swallowed in darkness, I swear I see a shadow standing there. Watching. Waiting. Like the shadow of my regret that will never leave. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. A quick shout out to my patrons, Melissa Perez, Lawrence Wallen, Eric Cifuentes, Jesse Hartley, Icy Narrates, Alonzo, Cupcake Hips, William Hartley, Rinku Star, Austin My Love, Mr. Sankofa, Seven Cities Journalist, and Ellie Hutmeyer. As usual, guys, I put a link to charity in the description. I'm going to keep it on the LA fires for a hot minute, but I will include other charities a little bit after. I understand that the fires are now no longer big news, but I would still like for the victims of the fires to receive help rebuilding their lives. And as I have been saying, even if that includes you unsubscribing from my Patreon for a while just so that you have something to donate to them, I highly encourage that and I will not be offended. And as usual, feel free to reach out to me on any social media. Let me know how I can be praying for you, and I am more than happy to do that for you. God bless you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.